Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I just wanted to record a fun little follow-up conversation with Non-Breaking Space about a game of John Company that we played while at Gen Con. So, NB, do you want to give everybody the rundown in case people weren't listening to the podcast or watching us tweet about this?
Yeah, sure. So, a little while ago, I was been working on this sort of RPG, journaling RPG game, that was played on like on top of a standard game at John Company, and like it really just sort of focuses on looking and exploring what it meant for the families by giving them sort of a bit of agency to tell their story through the game, and giving players the opportunity to really reflect on what the dynamics and mechanics of the game, how they're sort of coming from the personalities that are in these families. And so it was a bit of a experimental go to see if it would all come together. And I must say that I was very pleased with the results.
Yeah, I admit I was very nervous before playing because I'm not a great John Company player, and it'd been a long time since I'd played.
Mhm.
So I was like, okay, I don't know how to do this math. I'm gonna look like an idiot in front of Cole Drew, and it turns out this is a live play, so it's like a whole room of people. But it actually ended up being a wonderful experience, I think, because of the RPG elements that got introduced into the game.
Yeah. Like I think that it was fun sort of watching everybody approach it. Like this is like me as the designer facilitating and like just watching. It's the joy of like an RPG experience as well, because you get to see how everybody's just going to approach it and how the what level of immersion everybody goes into. And so one of the most amazing thing watching was just like by everybody's like 15, 20 minutes in, like after writing that first, everybody writes their first letter. It's like all in. It's like, and so everybody's just sort of slowly dipping into the madness that is their family and trying to like pull it all together, and like just being able to watch that happen really was just, yeah, it was fun to see.
Yeah, I felt like this is like a commit or go home kind of event, and I'm really glad that we all chose like the commit. So, for people who are curious about how this actually felt to play, basically it was a normal game of John Company, but every member of the family you introduced, there was like a character sheet for their specific cameo, and you gave them a name and a birthday, and you put them on a family tree in relationship to other family members, and then you also assigned them stats. So they had brawn, so sort of like military readiness, like wit, charisma, and what was the other one?
Finesse.
Finesse. There we go.
Yeah.
I lacked it, so that's why I wouldn't remember it. But what's funny is that these stats had nothing to do with actual gameplay or die results. They did, however, I think, make us embody our family members in different ways. And I know that I made in-game choices that I thought were fitting for the family members that I had created.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's like one of the like it's funny, like the stats at one point they're completely meaningless, right? They have absolutely no gameplay value at all. But everybody leaned into this is the state of this person, and it just helped explain the actions that were happening to them in ways that you're just like, oh, yeah, this is because of and I think like that's really one like just a subtle thing that was just beautiful to watch as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're watching all of us, so I assume that my behavior was actually probably typical for the other three people at the table as well.
Yes, yes, yes. Everybody was on their own, like everybody had their own character to it, but everybody was it was a wonderful collective experience watching everybody just go deeper and deeper into madness. Cole like just was like in the corner, just like going down the rabbit hole, just like scribbling, 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 scribbling. It was amazing, you know. I think there was that one moment where I'm like, so the way that I sort of facilitated it was that, like Liz said, there's character sheets and there's family trees, and then I play the archivist that's sort of just like keeping track of the dates, and also I can prompt any of the players by handing them a piece of paper and telling them one of their characters is going to write a letter. And so what I was going to refer to is like the one of the most amazing things was like me walking over with a piece of paper to hand a letter to Cole. And he's like, oh, no, 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 I've already got it. I'm already working on this letter right now. And so it's just like that just like captured the whole experience altogether of just like everybody sort of really going at it, and what it added to the gameplay, I think was just amazing.
Yeah, so from the player perspective, for those of you who want to know what this felt like, basically there'd be a key moment in the game, and NB would walk up to you and be like, "Okay, I want you to write a letter from X member of your family." So we had all the names to either a member of your family or to a member of somebody else's family, and I want you to discuss X thing that just happened. And so it could be something like, I sent a bunch of my military officers to an area where the governor did not use them, and so I just complained about that for a good while. Or actually, honestly, I think my favorite was the unintentional perfect story sync up of my like reluctant non-military inclined officer who somehow became governor and then had some horrible governor roles. And so he had to like make his excuses.
Yeah.
It basically just brought so much life to things that were just strategically annoying before, if that makes sense.
Like, yeah, in terms of stepping away from the math of it all and really into like the narrative of it all. It's just, yeah. It's funny because I think when we were talking about it on the podcast, I sort of alluded to it. Where I'm like, sometimes you just play something and you say that was cool and never do that again, you know? And that was not the I was like I was prepared very much for this to be one of those experiences like, okay, that was all right, just but I think it just really it affirmed in a way that I wasn't sure was going to be possible because like the potential for fiddliness is there, right? It's
Yes.
like on the top, it's just like this is like the most fiddly thing on a game that people don't necessarily think is the most streamlined of possible, though it is pretty smooth of a game, John Company. Um, Adding something like this on top of it, just being adding just like too fiddly, right? Um, and that was the risk. Like that was the big thing that I was just testing to see. Is like I know what I wanted to be able to do, but is it just too hard to do it? I think Liz, actually, you've tested something for me before. You tested worker placement,
I did.
and
Yeah.
and did you test it with a pencil?
Yes. I
Right?
think I did. Yeah.
Yes, I'm pretty sure you did. So
Yeah,
that
it was
was
like a
just
little grid.
yes. So that's another perfect example. Different type of game, different scale altogether, but just like testing the limits of it. Of like, okay, can I get players to actually do this with a pencil? And immediately after that round of testing, the pencil was gone. It's never come back, right? Like that's just sort of like that was cool. It's never we're never gonna do that again. And so this
But I
was
was
more.
open. I was open to it. Yeah. What was really funny is that, like there were moments where I was really stressed, but it was like I didn't know like what to name people, or I didn't know what
Mhm,
reasonable birthdays and ages might be.
mhm.
Honestly, I think the one thing that would have made that game easier would be literally a cheat sheet that was like, oh, if you
Yeah,
want to be this age, pick a date in this range. If you
yeah,
want to be this age, pick a date in this range. And here's some typical men's
yeah.
and women's names at the time.
Yeah, I wanted to do a random name generator. Just like it was just the time crunch got to me. But I think that's like one of the things that as I'm thinking about it and like, okay, I've got to do something else with this, or I've got to
Yeah.
like, or I've not even that I have to do something else with it, but more in terms of like, okay, I've got to actually refine it and make it actually repeatable, right?
Yes.
Is things like that, like name generator and like date, like being able to manage the dates on your own and stuff like that. Because, um, yeah, I think it's a beautiful addition to playing John Company, and I think a lot of players that like the game, like if you have a group that likes the game a lot, I think it's just one of those experiences that players are gonna love, like really enjoy having at least once. That's what I feel like that's you got to try it at least once. If you enjoy the game, it's one of those things like, oh man, I want you to be able to try this at least once. Um,
Yeah,
so
I gotta say, I would absolutely do that again. I
yeah.
would do that over Discord. Well, one thing that really made me laugh was that I don't know, like there's the part I think that when you play games, right? Like it's not that you want to impress your friends, but you definitely don't want to embarrass yourself in front of your friends. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm, hmm.
But like it was like it gave me a different layer where I could be playing with people who are masterfully good at the game, but still feel like I made a contribution by like writing a letter that made everybody laugh. Or that
Yes,
was just
yeah,
like spot on to the situation. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
And like
yeah,
I remember really feeling the same way about other people's letters. Like I don't remember who wrote it, and I don't think this is a quote that'll violate anybody's privacy and like the like sanctity of the game.
yeah,
But they were like talking about gossiping, gossip at a wedding.
yes.
And it was like, oh yes, the food was serviceable. The dance, appalling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it was so great. Like it absolutely, I felt like captured like that period piece vibe.
Hmm.
And it was so funny. And I just really enjoyed getting to appreciate other players at the table for that, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
I think the thing that was even like it was that added layer, and then there were also like everybody was getting like everybody got the memo to get the hook in there that really like gave that attached the character to the actions that were happening in the game. And so it really like serves as a way of like providing motivation, right? And like really
Yeah,
being able to see the motivation, not just like, oh, my die roll result was this, but like, oh, we tried this because, and it turned out, like this. And like
right.
that like was it was really just fun to see that on layered on top of all of these like table talk. It was basically like being able to put your own table talk on the record throughout the game.
Yeah, it was also really funny because you could actually see little alliances forming in like
Yes.
the tones of the letters.
Yes.
And what was very funny is that by breaking down the family of different characters, like I think Cardner and Drew both
Mhm.
noted this, is they had some members of their family who were friends, other members of their
Yes.
families who were not. So it was like they were being two different like factions within their
Yes.
own side as a
Yes.
result of the role playing.
Yeah, and I think like it's funny because we only did two turns, but the level of intricacies in the connections between the families and within the families in just those two turns was just like amazing. Just like wow, okay.
Yeah, I feel like everybody understood the assignment. It
Yeah.
was very good. So the other aspect of this play, though, that I was actually not expecting at the time that I had agreed to do it, and
Mhm.
I mean, I would have agreed anyway because if you ask me to do something, I'm gonna do it. So like, whatever. But I didn't realize it was gonna be a live play.
Mhm.
So how did that aspect of the event meet up with your expectations? And then if you're going to do it live again, what
Mhm.
would you change to either help the audience engage more or help the players like what could we have done differently and what went well?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think it really went rather well. There was a lot of commentary from the crowd itself, people like correcting rules and everything like that. It was the best. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And like people stuck through the whole thing and people were still engaged at the end. So I feel like there wasn't a lack of engagement. Everybody understood they were coming to observe and not necessarily as a participation thing. I think the challenge of like trying to make it participatory is just managing the random number of people that are there, right?
Yeah,
Like don't want to open the door for like a small section of people and like have another section of the people that's just like on the outside. And so I think that aspect, like we were talking about it then, like it's very much a game that can be played as a team game where there's like multiple teams and people are taking on these different roles, but to some degree how that scales is just really hard. Like as a person running the game, I could just see that scaling in a way that's really hard to manage because you have to
right.
deal with so many people's different I like different things. And so but I do think that like it would like I think one of the things that could be interesting, and I actually thought about this later, but I didn't try and do it, was to have the audience reading the letters instead of me reading the letters, right? And I think that in that way, they're getting to have that sort of touch and interaction with it as well. And seeing, yeah, and yeah. But I think that's like I think it's the type of thing that it's that type of a touch. It's not
Yeah.
like a fully participatory just because it's just it would be really hard to manage. I think like I'm not trying to say that I was doing hard work or anything like that, but just like it's one of those where in order to pull it together, there's a lot of like coordination that you have to be able to see, and the more people actually complicates. One of the things that I said when I was planning it with Cole, it's like I'm not going to do more than four people. I'm not sure that it is, even though the game goes up to six, I'm not sure how well it will work at six because it's just too many.
Right.
And like even it's too many and sort of too hard to manage the back and forth between everybody to be able to say like to be able to ensure that everybody's having a good experience, right? Like that was I think that in the role that I played then, I think I was able to manage and understand where everybody was in their experience enough to be able to ensure that everybody was having a good experience, which is what I think the role of the game master is. And so the more that you expand that out, the harder that becomes.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that's something that you want to do because it'll detract from what's actually happening on the board.
One thing that I was really relieved about is, in the podcast. So those of you who don't know, MB and I talked about this in a podcast a couple weeks ago, so I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But I was, oh, how are we going to handle the fact that we're being kind of horrible, and
Mm-hmm.
how are we going to role play that? One thing I actually really enjoyed about this is that we actually, I think, felt safe enough, including with an audience, because nobody was recording it, because it was just really meant as an experimental thing. Everybody was like, I think, the correct level of unhinged, where it was like
Mm-hmm.
proper to the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we also all were like clued into the game and understood what was going on. So there was like a freedom to explore, even though sometimes like you'd read somebody's letter back and they're like, oh God, we all
Yes.
went for it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the key thing about RPGs in general is that it sort of is meant to be that safe space to explore, not necessarily how you feel, but like understand the motivations, right?
Yes.
And where those motivations can lead. And I think that's the goal isn't necessarily to put on a hat and be this character. The goal is to understand who these characters are and how they interacted.
Yes.
And I think that's the assignment. And I think that's what everybody sort of understood and grasped.
Yeah, but I was like a very free space to kind of
Hmm.
go for it, and I really appreciated that. So, I don't play RPGs as much as I should, and one of
Hmm.
the reasons that I don't actually is that I find them extremely revealing,
Hmm.
and I have a hard time being that open
Yep.
with people. Like I struggle. I think that the best of yourself at a tabletop RPG is like your most vulnerable and open self that's
Yep.
just really going for it. And I sometimes hesitate and have a hard time really going for it, which is why I will typically default to board games instead.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm just not willing always to be that raw,
Hmm.
but I felt like this worked.
Mm. I wonder if that's because of the split of characters where you're not trying to put everything into one, or because you can't like identify yourself as just one. You can just sort of see yourself through all of, or see little pieces through all of them.
Yes.
And that sort of creates a safer space to even explore them.
I think that may be it because I never felt like I was any particular one of them. I felt like I was like telling a story with them in a little bit more of a distant way.
Hmm.
And I think that actually did help quite a bit.
I think that's one of the other things that was really interesting for me is just in terms of as a designer and designing things, it was another like wonder and question of like, okay, is this an experience that players can handle? Like you have to manage all your characters and put them on a family tree and say who's related to who as a part of a game is like a lot to ask of them. And that's a part of like the fiddly nature of it is that you have to do, you sort of need, I mean, actually, I should ask you, like, do you feel like there was any of it that was excessive or too much of an experience or anything that was a barrier to actually getting into the experience?
I definitely got a little anxious about time. And like whenever I put
Hmm.
somebody new into the writer or officer box, I'd be like, oh man, I gotta make a character sheet right now.
Hmm.
And so I definitely like felt a bit of irritation there,
Hmm.
but I also felt like it was worth it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If I'd had, again, like I mentioned, like some cheat sheets for like birthdays and some streamlining,
Yeah.
or maybe even some like, possible starting stats, just something like if you want to create an idiot, go with this if you want to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then tweak off of this. Because I really enjoyed just going extreme. I think this person has no brawn and all wit. How will this go? So I think that like just a little bit of cheat sheeting would help. But the thing
Yeah.
is that all of it was worth it when you got to the end of the round,
Hmm.
and then we read the letters
Yeah.
because they were so fun, and it was almost like being like a kid in school again, where you want the teacher to read your work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you actually want to see what everybody else did.
Yeah.
It was like the best kind of show and tell because I want to know what everybody was up to because like there were whole family events happening across the table that I had no idea about, and then the letters kind of like gave me insight,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was just really delightful, actually.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for you managing us as like the GM,
Mhm.
where did you find that you were having difficulty, if at all, and what would you change for your own experience?
I think that I wasn't able to be there for the players on the character sheets. And like I think that was like because I knew that there are things that like being able to do that is the tedious part of like being able to like, oh, I've got to come up with the character and, da, da, da. And so like I know that there's things that were like not that were missed on the character sheet or like there's things that there's information that's not there. And I feel like that's um sort of on me just not being able to be there individually. I kind of just had to be there high level to be able to come in and just sort of insert myself
Yes.
and not support on like, hey, how are you doing, and being able to do that. Like I was that I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And I think that's like the biggest challenge. That's again of why like you can't go much bigger because I know that I
Yeah.
couldn't do that at that for that level. So there's no way that it could go even beyond that.
Yeah, and of course you were also balancing between keeping us kind of on track and then also being entertaining to people who were watching.
Yeah.
So you had to like MC the whole thing. So
I was on my feet the whole time. And so yes. Oh, but yeah, but yeah, I think like, but I did feel like it was something that could be managed with the aids and stuff like that. Like that would make it so that it was a little bit easier.
yeah.
But yeah, I think that was the hardest part for me. Um, and there's like a dating thing. This was when like I wanted to make a date sheet and I was like, okay, I was gonna do this date sheet, but I just could not come up with a theory that made it feel like printing it out would be useful. Do you know what I'm
Mm.
trying to say?
Yeah, I would want to know things like what are the typical ages of new officers?
Hmm. Hmm.
What's the typical life expectancy? Like those are the kinds of things I'd want to know, right?
Yeah.
So I can decide like how old is the old generation, how young and plucky is the new generation, and how would
Yep.
that affect what they said?
Yep.
What are like the more middle-aged man positions, you know?
Yep. 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 No,
That's
that's
what I
true. Yeah.
that's what I was trying to kind of gauge. I just made it up because like who cares? Maybe my
Yeah.
family's like either late bloomers or early ones, but
I think that's what I needed to see to figure out what those aids need to be or how those aids need to be. I think that's sort of what it is that like
yeah.
I didn't have a sense of how to position that information to make it helpful because I didn't see how players would need them. And I think I got a sense of that a little bit better.
Yeah. One thing I also did enjoy is that, the cameos in John Company are both male and female images.
Hmm.
And we just like went with it.
Hmm.
We just went ahead and like had a female president. Like even if symbolically maybe her husband was the president, but she was the one running everything.
Yeah.
I sort of enjoyed the fact that like men and women were writing to each other behind the scenes about business this way.
Yes. 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 And I think that's again, I think that's a part because I don't think that it's a far stretch that these letters would be the letters that would be in the archives or like that would be have been kept from these families at that time. Not necessarily, like not verbatim and everything like that, but the
Right.
letters between this family to that family would be kind of about these things and along these sort of lines. And so like where it's the fiction and think that that's where it's really trying to give that voice of realism of like, oh, this is where this could have happened and how the motivations that you're coming up with there could have been real
Yes.
motivations.
One thing that I don't know if you could feasibly add this, but it would be very interesting if you could decide that members of your family were married in from
Hmm.
other families.
Hmm.
Where, again, Junko's already pretty semi-cooperative, but it'd be very interesting to like have it where, you have developed an attachment to a character who joins another family.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I think that would be like I would love to figure out a point where somebody on your family tree ends up on somebody else's family tree.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be fascinating because
Yeah.
then even if like Jonko is still proceeding as a normal game,
Yeah.
how would that affect player behavior? And would they do things to help or ally with or protect
Yeah.
characters that they had developed even more of an attachment to? Then like I
Yeah.
felt attached to my characters after 2 rounds of an experimental game.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think there's a lot of interesting things that can happen. I mean, like the mega game variant of this, where you play all the whole long scenario of John Company with it, would just
Yes.
have such like incredible like stories that just get weaved over this long period that you would just like, oh. There's something about that. Like I think that's sort of like what the next that I have to see. I think that there's definitely like a standard just sort of like play this and experience it. But the
Yes.
next that I have to see is like, okay, what's that long that long tail arc look like? Oh my goodness.
Yes. Well, I'm in if we're
Uh,
if we're ever doing that. But so speaking of, I've already, when we tweeted about this, people wanted to see what we were doing. There were people who asked for access.
yeah,
What I figured like we should just answer that question here. What
sure.
are your plans for making this kind of module, I guess, for Junko available, if
Mhm.
any? And yeah, how are we gonna work that, if at
So
all?
I'm not sure how I'm gonna make it available yet. I think that's a discussion that I have to have also with Cole and stuff like that. But I
Indeed.
do think that I have to finish the rules and get everything tight so that it can be shared. And so that's sort of the headspace that I'm at right now of just like how do I finish the rules and get them to a place where they can be shared? Just because I've just got to it's got to get done because I can't keep it in my head for too much longer, right? In terms of like sharing of the experience itself, I have the artifacts of it and I have like to go through them. And there's a way that I'll collect them. It's not going to be like the play-by-play AAR recording of it, but I think that there's a way that I'll share some of that after I share it with everybody that played to make sure that everybody's cool with it. Just to sort of as the artifact from the gameplay. I think that there should be an artifact from that game and it'll be good to share that around.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I won't keep you much longer, but I do want to say I am so glad that I played this version of John Company. I feel like it actually gave me a deeper appreciation of the game itself.
Mm.
I think that it kind of reawakened in me like an interest in gaming in ways that are more kind of like boundary breaking, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm.
It was one of the cooler gaming experiences I've ever had, like a once in a lifetime kind of
Nice.
fun thing to do. So I'm very, very glad it wasn't fun.
Nice. Nice. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. I think, yeah, it was an experience, and that's sort of what I wanted to get out of it. It was just like to give everybody this experience. And so I'm glad that all of the players were able to feel that as well as all of the people that were in the room because the feedback there was that it was the experience that I wanted them to have as well.
Yeah, I think it's like a very good reminder that sometimes when you game, you really are doing it like I wouldn't say for the lulls, right? But like for
Mhm.
the experience, like just let's just try it and see what happens. I feel
Yeah.
like we expect very polished experiences now, and
Hmm.
we want to see finished things. And I just really felt like this was a different thing and a reminder that we should be doing something different.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
Any last thoughts?
Um, yeah, just like enjoy gaming. Like this is it's I think this confirmed for me as well. Like this is an amazing time for games. Cause like who'd have thunk it, right? And so just like I encourage everybody to go out and have those amazing game experiences because like wow, what a time.
Yes, go out there and game to the max. That's what I would say.
Yes, for sure.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, please like, subscribe, comment. I'll let MB know if there are any good questions. And most of all, happy gaming.